Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. To fly or not to fly. Big Birds of Patagonia. Presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Daniel Hagaman. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Rob, and Natural Habitat Adventures for this opportunity to present today. I hope you're interested and you find something interesting about this talk, and that you're taking time out of your day to watch this webinar. What I'd like to talk about are some of the large, iconic, and charismatic birds in Patagonia. And I think a better title for this, and I thought about this afterwards, instead of to fly or not to fly, Big Birds of Patagonia, maybe this could be a talk on Patagonia's ambassadors for conservation, because these birds are birds that we enjoy looking at and birds that we see regularly on our NatHab trips. So I'd like to begin by giving you a little information about myself. So I've been living and working in Latin America for around 30 years in places like Mexico and Bolivia and Costa Rica and Chile. And I've have a keen interest in ornithology and birding. I conducted my master's research on these forests that are behind me here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And one of the things I was looking at, I worked with some researchers that were looking at endemic birds that are found in these particular forests in the high Andes at 15,000 feet. So I have worked and traveled throughout South America for 20 years. And I have also done some work with teaching university courses down in Patagonia, in northern Patagonia, at some biological field stations. We use them to station ourselves at. On this particular one is on Chilean Island, where we had some researchers that we were able to participate in this study, mist netting birds and tagging them for re-release, so that we would learn a little bit about their migration patterns and their population. This is a thrush on the left, and then on the right-hand side is a crested caracara, or southern caracara. So for NatHab, I work up in Alaska, and then I also work down in Patagonia. So I see both hemispheres at different times of the year. So I spend the summer up in Alaska, and then I spend the austral summer down in Patagonia. So I have a chance to see these birds, and I'm really excited. Hopefully you will also get to know these ambassadors for conservation. These are 4 iconic and charismatic birds. Like I said, they're commonly seen on our trips. And they're all very culturally significant and can be representatives of their habitat in Patagonia. And to learn more about the unique and varied lives of these birds, I will kind of present their life histories and their conservation status and threats that might affect these birds. 2 birds are flightless, and we have here the penguin and the rhea. And then 2 birds fly far and high to migrate to areas that are used for breeding and for feeding. So we have the Andean Condor and the Chilean Flamingo. So our first ambassador for the habitat of the high Andes Mountains is the Andean Condor. They also utilize the coastal areas of the Patagonia steppe and also the coasts on either shore, on the Atlantic and the Pacific. The Andean condor is the largest flying bird in the world, by combined measurement of weight and wingspan. It has a maximum wingspan of over 10 feet, 3 meters, and a weight can weigh over 30 pounds. Condors possess the heaviest average weight for any flying bird or animal. So trumpeter swans, they beats out trumpeter swans and some of the pelicans. There are some birds with larger wingspans, but they don't weigh as much. Those are the 2 species of pelicans, as well as hold on a second. I just got lost there. All right, here we go. Sorry, the range of the Andean condor is the following. It ranges all the way from Colombia in the north, all the way down to the south in Patagonia, which includes Chile and Argentina. So they're present on both of the coasts. It's a South American, it's a New World vulture from the family Cathartidae, which means the purifier. And it's the only member of the genus Vultur. It's found, its Quechua word, kuntur, refers to its common name. The common name originated from that Quechua word. Other relatives of the Andean condor are the California condor here on the left-hand side, and also the turkey vulture here on the right, which look very similar but are slightly smaller. Although the California condor is a little bit larger, it's not quite as heavy. So condors, they primarily feed off of carrion, and carrion is found in both domesticated animals, and also wild native animals. You have the sheep over here on the left and the bottom, and you have alpacas in the central Andes that condors feed on, as well as the guanaco, which are native to South America on the bottom. In some cases, condors will take advantage of animals that have been killed by mountain lions, and they will mob the mountain lion with sheer numbers and scare the lions off. A collective, just an interesting fact, a collective of condors is called a scarcity, or a condo of condors. So for the most part, these condors inhabit the high mountain peaks, and they nest between 3,000 and 5,000 meters. So they use the high peaks and the thermals to soar up to 15,000 feet. That's about half as high as a commercial air flight. Rarely do they flap. There was a study done in Argentina recently looking at the percent time that condors flap while looking for carrion. And in 250 hours of flight time, they only flap for 2.5 hours. So it's basically a 1% time flapping. So they expend very little energy. It's kind of like riding downhill, coasting downhill on a bicycle instead of having to pedal uphill. They don't have to expend energy, and they can spend a lot of time searching over wide areas. So condors, they exhibit sexual dimorphism. Where the male has a fleshy crest on top of its head on the right-hand side called a carbuncle. Females have more reddish eyes. The males have brownish eyes. The dominant males will also exhibit some other coloration, like red and orange and yellow coloration on their fleshy heads as a sign of dominance. The head and the neck are nearly featherless, similar to other vultures. And the beak is hooked. It's really adapted for tearing at carcasses and rotting meat. I have this in here because lifespan, it's interesting. This is Thau. This is a Andean condor that lived at the Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo for many years. I think it died recently, but it passed away at around the age of 80. So these are really long-lived birds. If you take a look at the talons of condors, they're not quite as curved as you would have in eagles or hawks. The middle toe is long and not curved, but it's good for walking. And like the California condor and other New World vultures, the Andean condor exemplify, it empties, urinates on its legs. In some cases, it thought that it's said to cool their legs off, but it also might be a way to purify their legs with the uric acid. This is a condor chick. I can't say that they're the most attractive animal ever, but they are one of the, like I said before, they're one of the most long-lived birds. In Patagonia, the nesting happens in September, October, and the nests are at elevations very high in the mountains, up to 16,000 feet. And they generally are inaccessible rock ledges where they're just kind of scraped out. The nest isn't really, one or two eggs are usually laid right on the rock itself. Chicks take about 6 months until they fledge. And as you, here's another comparison between a male, which is in the middle, a female that's on the top, and then an immature male on the bottom. And you can see the coloration pattern doesn't happen. It reaches sexual maturity at age 5 or 6, but may not become a dominant breeder for up to 9 years. So it takes a long time for these animals to mature. Condors, culturally, condors have been very significant in Incan, pre-Incan cultures, as well as currently. And the people living in the Andes see it as a symbol of strength and vitality. One of the powerful images that we have here by, and this is an artist, Mamani from Bolivia. And this is a festival that is not practiced much anymore, but was once practiced, where they would tie a condor to the back of a bull, symbolizing the two were going to fight it out, and symbolizing the clash of cultures between the strength of the Andean condor and the bull, signifying Spanish conquistadors. The condor is also significant in, this is the Andean cross, or the chacana, they call it. It's a symbol used by the Andean people to represent the 3 levels of their cosmology. The lower world, represented by the serpent, the middle world, represented by the puma, and the upper world, represented by the condor. The condor also represented the sun, or the sun god. And in some cases, you see that representation here on the right-hand side at Tiwanaku, which is an archaeological ruin in Bolivia. And then you also see it here on the left-hand side represented in ceramics. It's also found on, even currently, with the seal of Chile, and then also found on the money, the 10,000 peso bill on the left-hand side here. So it's a very significant animal culturally, and understanding more about it is helpful for us to develop conservation plans. So our next, I'm going to go on to our next ambassador for conservation. Our next ambassador is the flamingo, primarily the Chilean flamingo. It represents the saltwater lakes and lagoons in the Andes Mountains, but also the brackish estuaries and shallow bays along the Patagonian coast. The name flamingo comes from the Spanish or the Portuguese flame-colored, flama. It's thought that these birds might be the inspiration behind the mythical bird of the phoenix that rises from the ashes. the flamingo distribution, there are six species of flamingo throughout the world. 2 of them in Africa and Asia, and 4 of them in the Americas. The red one here is the one that's you're most familiar with, the Caribbean flamingo. And then there's 3 species from Ecuador south. And the one we're focusing in on is the Chilean flamingo. And let's pull that up. Okay, these are the 6 species of flamingo. The lesser flamingo, the greater flamingo are in Africa. The Caribbean flamingo, the one that's in Florida, is there's a photo of it here as well as on the left. The one we are talking about primarily that is in Patagonia is the Chilean flamingo. The James flamingo and the Andean flamingo are found in the central Andes, in Bolivia, Peru, and Chile and Argentina, that area. So like I mentioned, the only species present in Patagonia is the Chilean flamingo. Even though it's called the Chilean flamingo, it's also found in Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, Uruguay, and Brazil. And it's a seasonal migrant. These flamingos spend the spring and the summer in the highlands breeding, usually from October to the end of March, and then they migrate to lower latitudes and elevations on the Argentine steppe to the east, where the birds head for the winter in search of a milder climate. So flamingos are large birds. They're identified by their long necks, their stick-like legs, and you can see here the Chilean flamingo has kind of a red on its, or darker colors on its knees and its feet. Flamingos embody the saying, you are what you eat. The pink and the reddish colors of a flamingo's feathers come from eating pigments found in the algae and invertebrates. Okay, they consume the invertebrates, and the algae has a lot of beta carotene, which is an organic compound that contains a reddish orange pigment. It's also found, beta carotene is found in many plants, but especially in plants like tomatoes, spinach, pumpkins, sweet potato, and of course, you have your carrots too. And the mollusks and crustaceans flamingos snack on are similar. They're packed with that, the carotenoids and those pigments. So to eat, flamingos will take and stir the bottom up with their feet and duck their heads under the water, and they will then filter out their meal. And the filtering of food items is assisted. This is actually a Caribbean flamingo or American flamingo, and they are assisted by these hairy structures called lamella, which are line the mandibles on either side, and has a large rough surface tongue, and you can see that that's also acts as a filter. What they do is they stick their heads under the water and they will pump their tongues up and down, pushing the water and the mud out of their bills, but then leaving the algae and small invertebrates to remain in their mouth that then swallow. It's very similar to how baleen whales will filter their food. Another characteristic of flamingos is that they stand on one leg. This is thought to conserve energy, where they can rest. They're very stable this way, and they also conserve body heat when the water is cold or if it's windy out, and they can concentrate their heat in their core. This is in Torres del Paine National Park in Chile, where we visit for natural habitat trips. One of the extreme places in which the Chilean flamingo may migrate to during their breeding season is further north than Patagonia. It's in the central Andes. This is the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia. There's also salars in Chile and Argentina, where these flamingos migrate to. And what they will do, these are salt flats that have lots of mineral deposits. And this is us in the Uyuni salt flats a few years back. And these are unique areas where ash from volcanoes, call that up, sodium carbonate found in the volcanic ash. On the left-hand side, you see some volcanic ash. It washes into these shallow lakes and lagoons, creating a very mineral-rich environment where algae and brine shrimp and other microinvertebrates live. The flamingos migrate here to breed during the summer rains. This is a nest of the flamingo's nest. It begins, they stir up the mud and they actually create this little mud platform with a depression on the top that they will then lay their eggs. One egg usually on this platform. It's even represented here on the Chilean 20,000 peso bill because of its importance in Chilean culture. And this typically happens in the summer breeding season. If you take a look at baby flamingos are gray or white after the chicks hatch, the only parental expense is feeding. Both the male and the female feed their chicks, and they feed it with a type of crop milk produced in glands in the upper digestive tract. So it's filled with fat, protein, red and white blood cells. It's very similar to how pigeons and doves feed their young crop milk. So it's similar in some ways to that family of birds. And then once they're big enough and they develop their bills, then they're able to filter feed for themselves. We've also found recently that there's a new genetic relationship between flamingos and grebes. We thought originally that flamingos were more closely related to herons and egrets, but now we realize through genetic studies that they're more closely related to grebes than other birds. All right, so now we're finishing up with flamingos. Our next ambassador for conservation, number 3, is the Darwin's or lesser rhea, primarily found on the dry Patagonia steppe. The rain shadow of the Andes creates a dry area that primarily has bunch grass and shrubs on the eastern side of the Andes. Much of this land is held in large private ranches or estancias. Interestingly enough, a collective of rheas is called a mob. Rheas got their name. It's named after the naturalist Darwin. It's called the Darwin's rhea or Nyandu or Choike. Its population is primarily in Argentina, and you can see the green distribution area here in Argentine Patagonia, but it's also found in some select areas on the Chilean side. And then has been reintroduced, that orange down there on the bottom has been reintroduced to areas of Tierra del Fuego. So rheas are part of the family of ratite birds, which also include ostrich and emu, cassowaries and kiwis. For a comparison, when fully grown, an ostrich might weigh up to 300 to 400 pounds and stand 8 feet tall. A rhea, an adult rhea, is about 5 feet tall and weighs 60 to 100 pounds. to give you a comparison, but they are very similar in behavior. The Tehuelche people, or Aonakenk people, were familiar with this, and they used it for hunting. And this is a bolo that they used for hunting this animal on the Patagonia steppe. Also, they were familiar, the Tehuelche people were familiar with the Southern Cross constellation, and they actually looked at it not as a cross, but as the foot of a rhea, represented by the three toes. The story goes, the great rhea was escaping some hunters that trapped the bird in a canyon, and the bird used a rainbow to escape into the heavens, making a footprint in the southern sky that ended up being the Southern Cross. The hunters flew a bolo of 3 rocks. That's a typical weapon that they used down there for hunting the bird, and it would wrap around the legs. But they missed, and the bird, as well as the bolo, were lost in the sky, and the bolo that was lost ended up becoming the constellation of the Belt of Orion. We take a look at size of a rhea egg compared to some chicken eggs. It's about twice as long and about 10 times as heavy. The rheas in general are, what typically happens is that males are in charge of scratching out a nest, brooding the eggs, and caring for the chicks once they hatch. Females come and mate. They lay a few eggs over the time of a few days, and then they move on to another male at his nest. Males will then raise that clutch laid by different females. And this is essentially, it increases the genetic diversity of the population. The males may mate with between 2 and 12 females during one mating season. And the incubation period is between 30 and 44 days that they're sitting on that nest. And there are can be up to 55 eggs in one nest. They have been known to adopt young from other males as well. Most of the eggs will hatch around the same time. This is a male rhea taking care of the nest. Some of the chicks have hatched. They will protect them from predators like the puma and the fox in the areas. So here's a flock of rhea, and this is the male. You can see the larger male on the kind of the left center. And these are all his young from that particular year. So chicks almost look fully grown by the end of the first year, but they're not going to be able to reproduce until about their 3rd year. All right, so we've covered 3 ambassadors, and our 4th ambassador here is for the coastal ecosystems. Our final ambassador is the penguin, representing the marine habitat in those coastal ecosystems in Patagonia. The most prevalent is the Magellanic Penguin, which is found all through Patagonia and on the coastal islands. And you might be interested, another NatHab guide, Lulia Gonzalez, she presented a webinar on penguins and their evolutionary history. If you're interested in seeing that, that is available as well. I don't have enough time to go through all that. But here we go. Distribution. The distribution of Magellanic penguins, as you can see here, is the southern cone, or that area of Patagonia on both the Pacific and the Atlantic coasts. Each spring, they migrate from further north, and they come from the Brazilian coast and further north from Peru and down the coast of Chile, down to Patagonia. They spend the winter in those warmer climates because they're not required to be on land. They only need land for breeding and molting. So of the 17 or 18 species of penguins that we have in the world, there are 5 that we find in Patagonia. 2 or 3 of them are commonly seen on the mainland or on Tierra del Fuego. Depending on the season, Patagonia is home to a number of different species of penguin. Magellanic penguin is the most prevalent, although you might find the other ones that I have here, the king penguin, the Humboldt penguin, the Gentoo penguin, and the southern rockhopper penguin. Martillo Island off of Ushuaia is a place where you can see multiple species at once. So here we have, there's a small colony of king penguins on Tierra del Fuego, and that's on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, we have both the Humboldt and Magellanic penguins. And in places, they tend to nest in in the same nesting grounds. You can see the difference between the two. The Humboldt penguins are the ones with the one black stripe across their neck, and the Magellanic penguins are the ones with 2 black stripes across their neck. The Humboldt penguins tend to have a little bit more fleshy pink around their bill as well. But the Humboldt penguin is highly endangered in a way because its population is very low. I'll get into that in a minute. So when Patagonia warms up in September to October, Magellanic penguins migrate from the north back down to these areas in which they hatched. The male will then dig a burrow. In some cases, they'll clean out the one that they've used in the past, and then the females arrive later on. And there's lots of noise. They're trying to find each other. They can recognize each other with their voice. The Magellanic penguin, along with the Humboldt penguin, are also called the Jackass Penguins, after the donkey-like calls that are made during the breeding season. And once an egg is laid, the parents care for the egg and they take turns going on fishing excursions to feed that young. They're well adapted for life in the water, but on land they're a little bit clumsy because they feed on marine fish and they live almost entirely in salt water. They have specialized salt glands that eliminate excess water from their body or excess salt from their body. They also excrete an oil from a gland just above their tail, and this oil helps waterproof their feathers once they're done molting. So Magellanic penguins, they give birth each year in November. This is a young one over here on the left that is molting. It looks pretty awkward and not very waterproof at that point because it's losing all these feathers. So parents will then take turn fishing and returning to regurgitate food into the baby penguin's mouth. One of the largest colonies of penguins is south of Puerto Madryn or Trelew on the Argentine coast, and it's a place called Punta Tombo, and it has about 100,000 pairs of penguins that nest there. This is a time when we were down there. This is my son when he was very young. It's interestingly enough that penguins in Chile and Argentina, they're known as the child bird, or the bird child, because of its resemblance to humans standing on their hind feet. There's a poet, Pablo Neruda, if you've heard of him, has inspired many has many bird-inspired poems. One of them being about the Magellanic penguin dressed in night and snow, and it's a beautiful ode to that salty age of the penguin and its ability to survive in this harsh environment. So penguins, this is another map of the penguins and their distribution area. It was named after Ferdinand Magellan, who in 1519 sailed around the world. So this is kind of an ode to him. So this is a habitat where penguins are. Birds can live for up to about 20 years. There are probably more penguins in Patagonia than there are people. There's about 1.7 million pairs of Magellanic penguins that call Patagonia home. And there's about 2 million people that live in that area of Patagonia. And I mentioned here, I just am demonstrating the Humboldt and Magellanic penguins. And I guess we'll move on to this here. When it comes to eating, penguins they eat fish. These Patagonian penguins head to the water to score food, and their diet includes sardines, squid, primarily sardines and squid, and other small fish. Their tongues have barbs that point backwards so that they're able to grasp those fish. And actually the roofs of their mouth as well have tiny hairs that are pointed backwards. So this allows them to catch fish easily and swallow them whole. They don't have any teeth to chew them up. Another species that we have in Tierra del Fuego, this is kind of a recent phenomenon. Old timers in Tierra del Fuego talked of a long time ago when there was a king penguin colony in this location, which is close to Porvenir. At the same spot, there was a group of about 45 king penguins that started to reestablish themselves about 10 years ago. And it seems like this area is increasing and they're reproducing in this area. So it's been successful. It's on private land. Also a small group of southern rockhopper penguins have started to join the king penguin population this is a bay called Useless Bay. Both of these penguins, the rockhoppers and the king penguins, are found throughout the sub-Antarctic islands, but rarely seen on Tierra del Fuego or on the mainland. Collectively, you should be interested. Grouping of penguins is called a huddle. This is the facility. They've actually put up some nice blinds on this private land to observe penguins. You can see them right through the window there, where they're kind of across that river. And this is a blind to just prevent them from getting spooked when there's visitors around. So it's a way that we can watch them without interfering. Here we have some close-ups of the king penguins. I'm not going to get into the details. It seems like this population is small, but it's growing, and there's some interesting behaviors that we can observe when going to this private reserve. All right. So here we have, now that you know a little bit more about these 4 ambassadors for conservation, and we've learned a little bit about each one of these species and where they live. Let's talk a little bit about the threats that these species have encountered and some conservation efforts that have taken place to increase the numbers of these animals. And we'll talk about that question, to fly or not to fly. I guess that was the initial question, right? So condor. Condor to fly, this is one of those animals that has a wide range. It has a home territory, but it also expands its territory. It has many threats. One of them, similar to the condor in the States, the California condor, there are threats like lead contamination from lead ammunition, also poisoning of animals, illegal capture and cultural threats, the infrastructure getting caught up in power lines. This is probably our most endangered of the species that we're talking about, and left all through the Andes, there's only just over 6,000 individuals left. There are some projects that are assisting. Many different countries have their projects to reestablish condor populations in the Andes. There's organizations like Wildlife Conservation Society in Bolivia and throughout Latin America, as well as BirdLife International, the Peregrine Fund. They're all concerned about the condor, and their condor studies ended up starting in the 1960s when we realized our California condors were having issues. They actually used Andean condors as a surrogate to figure out how to captively breed and raise condors in captivity, and then re-release them into the wild to increase populations in the wild. And this was successful. And so this is actually on the left-hand side, this is a condor puppet that you see here that's being used to feed a condor chick in captivity, so that the chicks wouldn't, or the humans wouldn't imprint on the chicks. They use these puppets. This has been really important, and zoos have played a really important part in the reintroduction of condors here in the States with the California condor, but also in Latin America with the Andean condor. This is a organization that has released 215 condors throughout the Andes. This is Andean condors, and all the way from Venezuela all the way down through Chile and Argentina and Bolivia. The other species that we talked about were the Chilean flamingo, and we have Chilean flamingo is just the only one in Patagonia, but it is the most prevalent of all the 4 species of flamingo that we have in the Americas. It has a healthier population, but look at these other numbers. The Andean flamingos, there's only 34,000 of them left. And James or Puna flamingos at 64. And this is something that they're threatened by. Water could be an issue in these highland lakes. If more water is being used by populations and the lakes don't have certain levels, this could be also climate change or water use. These flamingos might lose their breeding habitat in the high Andes. There are some conservation challenges with mining and unregulated tourism, which can threaten the birds in these nesting habitats. One of the interesting things, I'm bringing this up as a topic of conversation. One of the interesting things coming out recently, we had this big push for electric vehicles. Much of the lithium that we use for batteries to store electric solar power, much of that lithium, 70% of that lithium, the world's lithium, is found in this area of Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, called the lithium triangle. It's a water-soluble element that can be extracted, but it needs a lot of water for extraction. This is going to be a topic of conversation. If we manage the mining of this mineral well, then this might be potential for future to decrease global climate change. Hopefully, we won't just have this to remember those flamingos by in the future. I actually found this to be interesting because these flamingos they're supposed to represent the Caribbean flamingo, but it actually looks more like the Chilean flamingo with the yellow bill. And anyway, let's get back. So the birds that are non-flying birds are not as threatened, but there are some efforts to reestablish populations. The rhea, there's not a complete population study that has been done, but there is very few rhea are present in the area of Chile, and so there's been some reintroduction and breeding of Darwin's rhea by the Tompkins Conservation and now National Park System in Chile, in a place called Valle Chacabuco, where their presence is. But they're trying to increase the population of rhea in this area on the eastern side or the western side of the Andes. So this is from the Patagon Journal. It just talks about the reintroduction project, trying to raise rhea in captivity and then re-releasing them into the wild. And this is a promising step. All right, now we're looking at our last ambassador is penguins. And if we take a look at the Magellanic penguins, like I mentioned before, there's 1.5 to 1.7 breeding pairs of Magellanic penguins in the world. King penguins, there's over 2 million breeding pairs of king penguins, not on the continent, but in all through those islands that are off of Antarctica. The southern rockhopper and the gentoo are, there's 1 million southern rockhopper and gentoo as well, at 387,000. The Humboldt penguins are the ones that primarily breed in the Humboldt Current from Chile up to Peru, and those are have been declining. So I'd like to I've always thought that conservation is a multifaceted approach, and there's a place in central southern Chile. It's a private land called Parque Ahuenco, and I really like their approach to conservation. And it's up here on the left-hand side. It's a Parque Ahuenco Conservando Juntos, which means together we can accomplish conservation of these important ecosystems and the animals that are there. It takes not only national protected areas, but also private parks, ranches, and international organizations, conservation groups like WWF and philanthropists to provide funding, sustainable tourism, outreach and education to local communities. It takes all those to protect animals and the habitats in which they live. And we can accomplish that together. And I think Parque Ahuenco has really established that. They took a village that was primarily using penguins for bait for fish, and they've been working with those communities for years to create a sustainable community tourism projects in those areas that would bring funding into the communities, as well as doing community education. And that's, I think, a inspiring way to look at conservation as a whole. So I guess with that, I would like to conclude my talk, and I thank you for listening and your time. I hope that it was educational and you learned a little something in the process.
Thank you, Daniel. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. With that, let's get to a few questions. So it looks like the rhea has long eyelashes. Do you know why that is, Daniel?
Well, they do tend to, maybe it's to, I'm not sure, but maybe it's to keep dust out of their eyes. They do take dust baths, so they will actually go in. They don't have that gland for keeping their feathers preened, and so they actually will go in and bathe in and dust bath themselves. And so maybe that's just to keep dust and grit out of their eyes. It's my hypothesis. I'm not sure.
It's a fine hypothesis. So how do the male rheas protect their young from pumas, especially when they're on the nest?
So they have, well, they have very strong runners. So very soon after the chicks are hatch, they are able to run. And the male rheas, the adults are very capable of kicking and using their large claws, I guess, or fingernails, feet to stomp on predators. So, and they're able to run at about 37 miles an hour. So they're able to escape those predators fairly easily.
Wow, that's fast. So let's talk about the condors. Can the Andean condor, can it crush bones to eat the marrow, or does it leave the bones?
I think it would probably leave the bones. It doesn't really have that strong of a beak. But I imagine other animals would come in, and many times the condor would take advantage of a kill that's already happened. And so that maybe a mammal like a mountain lion would have come in and crushed some of those bones. And then they would take advantage of anything they could pick off of that carcass.
So does the comb on the male condor, does that impact their vision at all? Does it help them at all?
No, I think it's just attractive for the females.
So it definitely helps them.
And it helps them in that way, right?
Are the condors protected in Patagonia and other South American countries? And if so, what is the penalty for poaching?
The penalty, this is something that there's definitely a penalty. Many of the countries, the Andean countries, have protected the condor. And there was a case just recently in southern Bolivia where 30 some condor were poisoned. And there's actually a case, I think it's in court recently, that I think they might be trying that person now. Anyway, so it's a big issue. And it's a big conservation issue because you might only have, in a mountain range, you might only have 50 condor that are present in that entire range. And so the condors are very spread out. They utilize a wide area. So if 30 of them die in one place, that will almost eliminate that population from those particular mountains. And so it's real critical that we educate. I think part of it is community education when it comes to these animals and their protection.
So let's talk about penguins. Do the different penguin species, do they interbreed?
Not that I know of. I think that the species are unique and separate and will not interbreed.
Now, are there Magellanic penguins? Are they also found on the Falkland Islands or in on South Georgia, or are they just in
Oh, they're
Patagonia?
found out. Yeah, they're found throughout the islands as well. Like I said, the largest population of Magellanic penguins is about 100 breeding pairs in Punta Tambo, which is just it's on the continent. But there are other populations that are more difficult to get to on the sub-Antarctic islands, like the Falklands. Actually, the Falkland Islands, one of their coins has a Magellanic penguin on it. So it's one of those penguins that is seen often down there.
Now, you mentioned a Pablo Neruda poem which focuses on the penguins. Do you know what the name of that poem is?
It's called Pinguino Magellanico. Yeah, it's yeah, the Magellanic Penguin. It's a beautiful poem. So you should look it up. Look up Pablo Neruda and look up Magellanic Penguin, and it should pop up.
All right. Well, let me ask you this question. Can you see all four of these birds on a NatHab trip? And if so, do you know what that trip is?
So currently on a NatHab trip, there is potential to see all four of these, yes. And that would be the Patagonia, the only trip that NatHab offers in Patagonia. And we'll see condors. We won't see them as close and personal because they're pretty skittish of people. Rheas, we will see fairly close. We'll see groups of them. The flamingos we usually see in the lagoons. And then the penguins, the Magellanic penguin, we don't go to a colony of Magellanic penguins, but we do go to a colony of king penguins. And we might see Magellanic penguins in the surrounding waters near the shore.
Wow, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. Unfortunately, that's the last question we have time for. So I'd like to throw it back to you, Daniel, in case you have any closing comments.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to close with that idea. You guys have all heard of flagship species. Well, these are all flagship species. Means they're significant in the fact that we can rally around these species to preserve the species, but also the habitats in which they live. It would also be considered an umbrella species, where if we preserve these species, then we also preserve the habitats in which they thrive. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for joining me, and thank you, Rob and NatHab, for the opportunity to present today. I hope it was educational.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'd like also to thank everyone who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.